Have you ever had a gut feeling that you were in danger? I got home and immediately something felt wrong, which scared me because 3 houses on my street had been broken into that month. I stood in the doorway listening but heard nothing except my own breathing. The coat rack looked like it had been moved slightly to the left, but I told myself I was being paranoid. I stepped inside and noticed my mail wasn't on the entry table where I'd left it this morning but spread across the floor. My heart started beating faster as I picked up the envelopes, telling myself maybe the cat had done it, except I didn't have a cat. The living room looked normal at first glance, but then I saw the couch cushions were wrong. The middle one switched with the left one. Someone had moved them and tried to put them back. My mouth went dry as I walked further into the room and saw the TV remote on the coffee table pointing the wrong direction. The curtains were open wider than I'd left them this morning. There was a glass on the side table I didn't remember leaving there. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, but my body knew better. The kitchen was next, and I could see from the doorway that the drawers weren't fully closed. The knife block had been turned, and I could see the biggest knife was missing. My laptop bag was on the counter where I'd left it, but the zipper was open. Someone had been through my things, and my hands started shaking as I realized they might still be here. I needed to get out, but my phone was upstairs in my bedroom where I'd forgotten it this morning in my rush to work. The landline was in the kitchen on the wall, but I'd have to cross the open space to get to it. I stood frozen, and that's when I heard it. A creak from upstairs. The floorboard outside my bedroom that always made that exact sound. Someone was up there right now, moving around in my room, and I was trapped between them and the front door. Another creak, closer to the stairs now, and I could hear drawers being opened in my bedroom. I had to make a decision fast. I moved as quietly as possible toward the kitchen, reaching for the phone on the wall. My hand was inches from it when I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy and not trying to be quiet anymore. I grabbed the phone, but my fingers were shaking too badly to dial, and I dropped it, the handset clattering against the wall. The footsteps stopped, and I knew they'd heard me. I picked up the phone again and managed to dial 9, but then heard rapid footsteps coming down the stairs, and I ran for the back door. It was locked, and my keys were in my purse in the living room, and the footsteps were getting closer, crossing the living room now. I ran to the pantry and squeezed inside, pulling the door almost closed but leaving a crack to see through. The kitchen light flicked on, and I saw a man I didn't recognize wearing dark clothes and gloves, looking around slowly. He picked up the phone I'd dropped and hit the receiver, ending my partial 911 call. He said out loud, "I know you're here. I heard you come in." He opened the refrigerator and looked behind it, then checked under the sink, getting closer to my hiding spot with each step. I could smell his cologne, something sharp and chemical, and hear his breathing as he passed inches from my hiding spot. I held my breath as he walked past the pantry toward the back door, checking if it was still locked, giving me a clear path to run. I waited until he was facing away, then burst out of the pantry and ran for the living room. He shouted and chased after me, but I was already at the front door, grabbing the handle, turning it, but it wouldn't open. The deadbolt was locked, and I needed the key, and my purse was on the floor, and I dropped to grab it. His footsteps pounded closer as I dug through my purse, lipstick and gum falling everywhere, looking for my keys. I found them at the bottom and stood up, fumbling with the key ring, trying to find the right key in the dark. He was right behind me now, and I jammed the key at the lock but missed, my hand shaking too badly. I tried again and got it in, but it wouldn't turn. It was the wrong key, and I felt his breath on my neck. I screamed and tried another key, but it was too late. His hand wrapped around my wrist and twisted hard, the keys falling with a metallic crash. His other arm went around my throat from behind, and he whispered, "Stop fighting, or this gets worse." And I could feel something sharp pressing against my ribs through my shirt. His grip tightened on my wrist when I tried to pull away, and the knife pressed harder into my ribs. The sharp point pushed through my shirt, and I felt it scratch my skin. I stopped struggling right away, and my whole body was shaking, so bad I could barely stand. My voice came out way calmer than I felt when I told him he could take whatever he wanted. My purse was right there on the floor with everything spilled out, and my laptop was in the bag on the kitchen counter. He laughed quietly and said he already went through everything upstairs while I was at work. His breath was hot on my neck and smelled like cigarettes and something sour like old coffee. He shifted his weight and pulled me back from the door a step and asked what my ATM pin was. I told him right away without even thinking about it because I just wanted him gone. Then he wanted my phone passcode, and I gave him that too, even though my whole life was on that phone. He asked for my online banking password, and I told him that one too, and then my email password, and the code to my garage door opener. His hand holding the knife was shaking now, and he kept looking out the window next to the door like he was expecting someone. The way his hand trembled made the knife point move against my ribs, and I could feel a wet spot where it had broken the skin. He seemed as nervous as me, which gave me a tiny bit of hope that maybe he didn't really want to hurt anyone. I mentioned that my neighbor usually came by around this time to check on things since all the break-ins started happening on our street. It was a total lie, but he didn't know that, and he cursed under his breath and his grip loosened just a little bit. He looked toward the door again, and then back at the window, and I could feel him trying to decide what to do next. I told him my car keys were in my purse and the tank was full and he could be 3 states away before anyone even knew I was home. He thought about it for a second, and I felt him shifting his weight like he was considering it. The knife moved away from my ribs just a tiny bit, but his arm was still tight around my throat. Then I started coughing hard and doubled over, which made him step back without thinking. While I was bent over coughing, I knocked into the side table and the lamp crashed to the floor and shattered. He grabbed my arm and yanked me back up, but we both froze when we heard a dog barking right outside my front door. Someone knocked loud, and it was Alejandro from next door asking if everything was okay because he heard a crash. The intruder clamped his hand over my mouth, but I bit down as hard as I could on his palm. He yanked his hand back with a curse, and I screamed Alejandro's name as loud as I could. I heard Alejandro yelling that he was calling 911 right now, and then the intruder shoved me hard into the wall. My shoulder hit first, and pain shot down my arm as I fell to the floor. He ran toward the back door and fumbled with the lock for a second, before just ramming his shoulder into it. The whole frame cracked and the door flew open, and I heard him crashing through my backyard. Sirens were already wailing in the distance, getting closer fast. I crawled to the front door and reached up with my good arm to turn the deadbolt. My fingers were shaking, so bad it took 3 tries to get it open. I pulled the door open and basically fell out onto my front step where Alejandro caught me. He held me steady and told me the police were 2 minutes away and everything was going to be okay. I couldn't stop shaking and crying, and my shoulder hurt so bad I thought I might throw up. Alejandro's wife Maria came running over with a blanket and wrapped it around me while Alejandro kept watch in case the guy came back. 3 patrol cars pulled up with lights flashing and officers jumped out with guns drawn. 2 of them ran into my house while another went around back where the intruder had gone. An EMT truck pulled up and they came straight to me and started checking my injuries. I had bruises already forming on my wrist that were turning purple and black. My ribs had a small cut that was bleeding through my shirt, and my shoulder was swelling up where I hit the wall. They cleaned the cut on my ribs and put a bandage on it and gave me an ice pack for my shoulder. One of the officers came back and said the house was clear, but the back door was destroyed and there were muddy footprints through the yard. Another officer sat down next to me and started asking questions about what happened. I told him everything I could remember about what the intruder looked like. He was maybe 6 feet tall with dark hair, and he was wearing all black clothes and leather gloves. I remembered the sharp chemical smell of his cologne, and when he had grabbed my wrist, I saw part of a tattoo on his forearm that looked like some kind of bird, or maybe an eagle. The EMT dabbed at the cut on my ribs with something that stung and made me wince while another one wrapped an ice pack around my swollen wrist. They shined a light in my eyes and asked me to follow their finger back and forth, which made me dizzy. My shoulder was turning purple already, and they said I should get x-rays at the hospital, but I just wanted to stay and talk to the police. More officers kept arriving and going through my house with flashlights and taking pictures of everything. One of them bagged up the broken lamp pieces, and another one was dusting the doorknobs for fingerprints. A woman in a gray suit walked up and introduced herself as Detective Catherine Collins, and she had this calm way of talking that made me feel safer. She sat down next to me on the porch steps and asked me to tell her everything from the beginning again. I went through it all while she wrote in a small notebook, stopping me sometimes to ask for more details. She wanted to know exactly what the intruder touched and where he walked, and what he said word for word. I told her about that sharp chemical smell of his cologne that was still stuck in my nose. She asked if I saw any identifying marks, and I described the tattoo on his forearm that I glimpsed when he grabbed me. Alejandro came over with his phone and showed us something on the screen. His doorbell camera had caught someone walking up to my house around 2 that afternoon when I was at work. The video was grainy, but you could see the guy's build and his dark clothes pretty clearly. Alejandro scrolled to another clip that showed a car parked weird at the end of the street that wasn't usually there. Detective Collins took his phone and said she'd need copies of everything. She gave Alejandro her card and wrote down his contact info in her notebook. The crime scene people were still going through my house and said it would be hours before they were done. I couldn't stay there anyway with the back door busted open and knowing he'd been through all my stuff. Alejandro's wife Maria said I was staying with them tonight and wouldn't take no for an answer. Detective Collins said that was a good idea and gave me her card with her cell number written on the back. She said someone would call me tomorrow about getting my full statement at the station. I went inside with an officer to grab some clothes and my phone from upstairs, but everything felt wrong and contaminated. My bedroom drawers were all pulled out and my jewelry box was dumped on the bed. I stuffed some clothes in a bag without really looking at what I was grabbing. At Alejandro's house, I sat on their guest bed and finally called my brother Nathan, who answered on the second ring. I started crying as soon as I heard his voice and could barely get the words out about what happened. He said he was getting in his car right now and would be there in 3 hours no matter what. Maria brought me tea and sat with me while I called my boss to say I wouldn't be at work tomorrow. I lay in their guest bed staring at the ceiling and jumping every time the house settled or a car drove by. Around 4 a.m, I heard Nathan's car pull up and ran downstairs to meet him at the door. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and I started crying all over again. We sat at Alejandro's kitchen table and I told him everything while he held my hand. When the sun came up, Nathan drove me back to my house to meet the locksmith he'd already called. The guy changed every lock and installed new deadbolts that you could open from inside without a key. Nathan ordered security cameras on his phone that would arrive tomorrow, and a whole alarm system too. While we were there, Detective Collins called to tell me something that made my stomach drop. They'd connected my break-in to the other ones on our street based on the pattern and evidence. She said now that he'd escalated to violence, they were increasing patrols in our neighborhood. That should have made me feel better, but it just made everything more real and scary. My phone rang again, and it was my bank saying there were suspicious charges on my debit card. Someone had tried to use it at 3 different ATMs and a bunch of stores since yesterday. We froze all my cards and accounts right away, and started the fraud paperwork over the phone. The bank lady said the attempted purchases would help the police because those places would have security cameras. I gave her Detective Collins' number, so they could coordinate getting that footage. Later that afternoon, a woman named Luciana Mercado called from victim services. She had this gentle voice and explained how she could help me with everything from filing for emergency leave from work to finding a counselor. She walked me through what would happen with the criminal case and what to expect at each step. She set up an appointment for me with a trauma counselor for next week and helped me fill out paperwork for crime victim compensation. After a week at home, I tried going back to work, but I couldn't focus on anything. I kept checking the doors and windows and jumping when anyone walked behind my desk. My friend Portia noticed me shaking in the bathroom after a panic attack and stayed with me until I calmed down. She started eating lunch at her desk so she could cover for me when I needed to step away. My boss pulled me aside and said to take whatever time I needed, which was nice, but I could tell everyone was being extra careful around me. Detective Collins called with an update that made me actually feel hopeful for the first time. They got clear footage from a gas station ATM where he'd tried to use my card. Combined with traffic cameras from that area, they'd narrowed down his car and got a partial license plate. She said these investigations take time, but they were making real progress and she'd keep me posted on everything. 2 days later, Detective Collins called again, and my phone almost slipped from my hand when she told me what happened. A patrol officer spotted a car matching the description at a motel parking lot just 2 towns over, maybe 20 miles from my house. The license plate matched the partial they'd gotten from the traffic cameras, and the car had damage on the front bumper where he'd scraped something leaving my neighborhood. They couldn't arrest him yet because they needed solid proof he was the right guy, but they had officers watching the motel room 24/7. My hands started shaking as I realized he was still so close, probably planning to come back or watching for when the police would stop looking. I hung up and immediately checked all my new locks again, then pulled every curtain closed even though it was the middle of the day. That night, I turned on every single light in the house and sat in my living room with a baseball bat across my lap. My eyes kept darting to the windows every time a car passed or the wind made a branch scrape the siding. I tried to sleep on the couch but kept jerking awake thinking I heard footsteps or someone trying the doorknob. Nathan found me the next morning still sitting up with the bat and dark circles under my eyes. He made coffee while I told him about the motel, and we spent the day installing more motion sensor lights around the house. Nathan stayed another week, sleeping on an air mattress in my room and walking through the house with me every night to check the locks. His job kept calling, and I could tell his boss was getting mad, but he wouldn't leave until I promised I'd be okay. After he left, Alejandro and his wife Maria started checking on me every day without me even asking. They'd bring over food in containers and just sit with me at my kitchen table, not really talking about anything important but making sure I wasn't alone. Maria taught me how to make her special rice while Alejandro fixed my back door frame where the intruder had damaged it. 5 days after Nathan left, my phone started buzzing at 3 in the morning with alerts from the new security cameras. I grabbed it with shaking hands and saw someone in my driveway, moving around my car in the grainy night vision footage. The figure was trying different keys in my car door, and I recognized the way he moved. That same build and those same dark clothes. I called 911 while watching him on the screen, telling the operator exactly what was happening, and that this was the same person who'd broken into my house before. The operator kept me on the line while dispatching units, and I watched him get more frustrated with the keys, not knowing I'd changed all the locks, including my car. 3 police cars pulled up within minutes, their lights flashing as officers surrounded him before he could run. They found my stolen credit cards in his pocket along with the kitchen knife from my house still in his jacket. The officers brought him past my window in handcuffs, and even from inside I could smell that same sharp chemical cologne. The next morning, Detective Collins picked me up to go to the station for a lineup identification. My legs felt weak walking into the building and she had to guide me to the viewing room. 5 men stood behind the one-way glass, all about the same height and build, holding numbers. Number 3 turned slightly and I saw the tattoo on his forearm, some kind of snake design I'd glimpsed when he'd grabbed me. My whole body started shaking and I had to grab the table to stay standing, but I pointed at him without any doubt. The detective asked if I was certain, and I nodded, remembering his voice and that cologne smell when they'd brought him past me at my house. She wrote down my identification and had me sign papers while explaining what would happen next. The prosecutor met with me in a small conference room that smelled like old coffee and explained all the charges they were filing: home invasion, assault with a deadly weapon, theft, and attempted fraud from using my cards. They'd matched his DNA to evidence from the other break-ins on my street too, so he was facing charges for all 7 burglaries. She seemed confident about the case but warned me the legal process would take months with hearings and possibly a trial if he didn't take a plea deal. 2 weeks later, I had to go to his arraignment at the courthouse downtown. Nathan drove back to go with me and we sat in the back row of the courtroom. When they brought him in wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles, I grabbed Nathan's hand so tight my knuckles turned white. He never looked at me once, just stared down at his hands while his public defender entered a not guilty plea. The judge read through all the charges and set bail at $200,000, which the defender argued was too high, but the prosecutor pointed out his history and the violence involved. After the hearing, Luciana from Victim Services introduced me to a support group that met every Tuesday at the community center. I sat in a circle with 8 other people who'd been through break-ins or attacks, listening to their stories. One woman named Carol had her house broken into 2 years ago, and she talked about how she'd installed cameras and alarms just like me, but eventually learned to feel safe again. Hearing her say she could sleep through the night now without checking her locks gave me hope I'd get there too. My boss called to say I could work from home as much as I needed, setting me up with remote access to everything. Portia started coming over for lunch twice a week, bringing sandwiches from our favorite deli and sitting with me while I worked. These small routines helped me feel less isolated and more like a normal person with a normal life. We'd eat and talk about work gossip or TV shows, anything except what happened, and for those couple hours I could almost forget. Detective Collins called with updates every few days, and one call made me sit down hard on my kitchen floor. They'd found evidence linking him to 7 total break-ins across the county over the past 6 months, with more victims coming forward now that his picture was in the news. Each story sounded like mine, with someone coming home to find things moved or missing, though I was the only one who'd been there during the break-in. 3 weeks after his arrest, I got a letter with no return address that made my hands shake before I even opened it. His mother had written 3 pages apologizing for what her son had done, explaining he'd been struggling with addiction since he was 19. She wrote about him losing his job and his apartment, how she'd tried to get him help but he'd refused, how the drugs had changed him into someone she didn't recognize. Reading her words made him seem more human, which somehow made everything feel worse and more complicated. The prosecutor called the next morning to tell me about a plea deal they were offering him, 15 years if he pleaded guilty to all the charges. His attorney was trying to negotiate it down to 10 years, and she needed me to write a victim impact statement to show the judge how this had affected my life. I met with Luciana at the Victim Services office to work on the statement, and it was harder than I expected. Every time I tried to describe the fear I still lived with, I'd start crying and have to take a break. We spent 3 hours in that small office with its fake plants and motivational posters, me talking and her typing on her laptop. I told her about the nightmares where I'm back in the pantry watching him search for me, about how I couldn't use my own kitchen without remembering his footsteps. She helped me put it all into words that sounded official, but still felt true, and when we finished, I felt drained but also stronger somehow. The security company came the next day with a van full of equipment and spent 8 hours installing cameras, motion sensors, and panic buttons throughout my house. The main guy kept saying he'd been really busy lately with all the break-ins in the area, which didn't make me feel better. They put cameras at every entrance, sensors on all the windows, and gave me a keypad that could trigger a silent alarm to the police. The whole system cost more than I made in 2 months, but I needed it to sleep at night. Nathan drove back from his place 3 hours away for the plea hearing 2 weeks later. We sat in the courtroom's hard wooden benches, while lawyers talked back and forth about sentencing guidelines and prior offenses. The intruder sat at the defense table in his orange jumpsuit, never once turning around to look at me. After an hour of negotiation, he accepted 12 years with the possibility of parole in 8. When the judge asked if he had anything to say to me, he mumbled something about being sorry without lifting his head or turning around. I couldn't tell if he meant it or if his lawyer had told him to say it. After the sentencing, I stood in the courthouse hallway feeling weird, like I should be happy, but I just felt empty instead. Luciana found me there and explained this was normal, that getting justice doesn't magically fix the trauma. She suggested increasing my counseling sessions to twice a week to work through all these complicated feelings about him being locked up. Over the next few weeks, I started trying to make my house feel like mine again instead of a crime scene. Alejandro came over with his toolbox to properly fix the back door the intruder had broken through. While he worked, his wife taught me how to make tamales in my kitchen, showing me how to spread the masa on corn husks and add the filling. It was the first time I'd really cooked anything since the break-in, and having them there made the kitchen feel safer. We moved all the living room furniture around so nothing was where it had been that day. I bought new cushions for the couch in bright colors that made the room look different. 3 months after the sentencing, I still had bad days where every noise made me jump, but they were happening less often. I'd stopped sleeping with every light in the house on, though I kept a nightlight in the hallway now. My counselor said I was making good progress and that healing wasn't a straight line but more like waves, some days better and some worse. The insurance company finally sent a check after I'd filled out what felt like 100 forms and provided receipts for everything that was stolen or damaged. It didn't cover the full cost of my laptop and jewelry, but it was enough to help with the security system bills. I used part of the money to sign up for a self-defense class at the community center. The instructor was this small woman who showed us how to use an attacker's weight against them, and practicing the moves made me feel less helpless. Portia kept asking me to come to happy hour with our coworkers, and I kept making excuses until finally I ran out of them. I only stayed for an hour at the bar, nursing one drink while everyone talked about normal things like weekend plans and TV shows. My coworkers seemed relieved to see me acting more like my old self, though I caught them watching me carefully when they thought I wasn't looking. It felt good to be around people talking about regular stuff instead of trauma and court dates. A few weeks later, Alejandro knocked on my door with a clipboard and a plan to start a neighborhood watch program. He'd already talked to most of the families on our street and wanted me to help coordinate the meeting since I worked from home now. At our first meeting in his garage, 12 neighbors showed up with notebooks and worried faces. Listening to them talk about their own fears and close calls made me realize how much the break-ins had affected everyone, not just me. We set up a phone tree and a schedule for people to walk around the neighborhood in pairs during the evening. Working on something that helped protect all of us made me feel less alone and more connected to my community than I ever had before. 3 weeks later, I got an official letter from the corrections department that made my hands shake as I opened it. The intruder had been transferred to a state facility with addiction treatment programs as part of his sentence. I stared at the paper for a long time, part of me hoping he'd get help while mostly just wanting to never think about him again. When I told Luciana at our next session, She said both feelings were totally normal and didn't make me a bad person. The weeks turned into months, and slowly things got easier, though progress wasn't a straight line like I expected. Some days I'd feel almost normal. Then a car backfiring would send me into a panic attack in the grocery store parking lot. I kept going to counseling twice a week, and Luciana taught me breathing exercises that actually helped when my heart started racing. 6 months after the attack, something amazing happened that seemed so small but felt huge to me. I slept through the entire night without waking up once in panic, without checking the locks, without any nightmares. I laid in bed that morning just enjoying the feeling of being rested for the first time in half a year. Nathan called that afternoon to check in like he did every week, and I could honestly tell him I was doing better. He sounded so relieved and said he'd been worried about me but didn't want to push too hard. Around that time, Portia started mentioning this guy from her gym who she thought I'd like. At first, I shut down every suggestion of meeting him, but she kept bringing him up casually without pressure. Finally, I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop with Portia there too, just to get her to stop asking. His name was Jaden, and he was patient with my need to sit facing the door and didn't ask why I kept checking my phone. We met for coffee again the next week, then lunch at a busy restaurant where I felt safe with all the people around. He never pushed for anything more than public meetings and never made me feel broken for needing things to go slow. When I finally told him about the attack after our 5th date, he just listened without trying to fix anything. 4 months into dating Jaden, I got a thick envelope from the State Victim Compensation Fund. After mountains of paperwork and documentation, they'd approved my application for counseling costs and lost wages from work. The check wasn't huge, but it lifted a weight off my shoulders to not worry about therapy bills anymore. I sat down that night and wrote thank you cards to Detective Collins and Luciana for helping me through everything. Detective Collins wrote back saying she was glad to see me doing well and that my case had helped them solve several others. A year after the attack, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I wanted to move to a new apartment, somewhere without all the memories attached to every corner. Alejandro came over with his truck to help me pack and joked that I was taking half of Fort Knox with me. He helped me load box after box of security equipment, understanding why I needed every camera and sensor and alarm. My new place was perfect for someone with my new safety needs, on the 3rd floor with only one entrance to watch. The windows had proper locks that actually worked, and bars that could be removed from inside in case of fire. I spent the first weekend painting the walls bright yellow and green, colors that made me happy every time I walked in. I hung plants everywhere, filling the windows with green leaves that made the space feel alive and growing. Jaden helped me set up all my security stuff without making me feel weird about needing 3 different door alarms. The apartment complex had a doorman and security cameras in every hallway, which helped me sleep better at night. 6 months into the new place, work started to feel normal again instead of just something to get through. I led a big project that landed a major client, and my boss called me into her office, not to check if I was okay, but to offer me a promotion. Portia took me out to celebrate at our favorite restaurant, and we talked about normal things like her dating disasters and vacation plans. The attack felt like something that had happened to someone else, some other version of me from long ago. 2 years after that night, my life looked completely different, but in ways I couldn't have imagined. I checked my locks automatically but didn't think about why anymore, just habit like brushing my teeth. Sometimes I'd see someone who looked similar to him and my heart would skip, but then I'd breathe and move on with my day. Luciana had suggested I might want to help others going through what I went through, so I started volunteering with victim services. Every Tuesday night, I'd sit with someone in a hospital room or police station, being the person I'd needed when everything felt impossible. My life wasn't the same as before, but it was mine again, built stronger in all the broken places. Hey, thanks for letting me wander through all this with you today. That was a fun ride. I really appreciate you sticking around. I'll see you next time. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.